my name is Ash, and today I'll be doing an illustration of a flower beetle. This is a scientific illustration, so I'm going to be using references for this. I like to choose a couple different references. For example, this bug has a lot of color variance within its own species, so I'll grab a couple different photos in order to have a little bit of pick and choose at the color palette here. I'm not trying to be 100% like the reference photo of my choice, as long as the representation is accurate to that species. That's really what matters here. My general timeline is I like to make a sketch, I'll color block, and then I will go and blend. So I'm using a oil medium wet flow brush. I believe it's a Kyle T. Webster brush. Now this is in the Legacy brush pack that's already comes with Photoshop and the current Photoshop and the Adobe suite, but I believe he does sell them online elsewhere. To blend, I will lower the opacity and the flow to be equal measures. My middle ground is usually about 30%, but if I want to do high contrast areas like a highlight, I will usually go lower, like around 10%. And if I want to have a lot of more texture, I will usually go for 60 to 70%, and that will show a little bit more of the brush strokes if I want to look a little bit more impressionistic. You can use other tools to blend, like the mixer brush tool, the smudge tool, or the blur tool. However, I usually just use these to touch up areas. If you're not familiar with hotkeys, I really suggest to get familiar with them, whatever computer type you have. The hotkeys on Windows that I like to use all the time include the B for brush, E for eraser, CTRL-Z for undo, the Alt key for the eyedropper tool, and the square brackets to size my brush up and down. It makes everything go a lot faster and a lot more fluid. Now for the highlights, I usually like to make a separate layer in order to not disturb the color blending if I've already done that. It also makes it easy to move it around and whatever looks good. Sometimes highlights are a little off, or you can see something reflected in the shell that you don't want. So it's easiest just to make a separate layer, that way you can just merge it later. Here I use the lasso tool if you're not familiar with Photoshop, and I use that to resize things in order to make it a little bit more in proportion. This is a nice little cheat code for digital artists. I try not to use it as a huge crutch, but it is super handy in order to resize things when you're trying to be accurate. Again, if you're not familiar with Photoshop, the trick that I did here is I put the legs on a separate layer, and then I duplicated that layer, then I went to Edit Transform and flipped that horizontally. That way I have a good leg placement to work from. For this bug, I noticed that it had odd little brown spots on it, and I'm fairly sure that that's just dirt. But if you have poor reference photos of certain areas, it's completely understandable for very small things like bugs. My rule of thumb is just to go with what looks natural. Something else to note with a lot of animals is that animals are not perfectly symmetrical beings. So you will find sometimes the antenna, one is longer than the other, or one eye is bigger than the other, as in this bug's case. It's all up to you and your interpretation. Nothing has to be perfect. That is definitely not the goal for most nature illustrations that I go for. But I will, not be afraid to remove dirt or fix a blemish if I feel that it would look better in the end. Here I use an airbrush in order to get a smoother transition for my highlights. That's usually something that you only use for highlights, but I do like to keep as much texture as possible from my 30%, so it's really just, a judge of what looks best. And here I am putting in the pores of the shell. I will duplicate this layer and I will place that layer underneath, and then I will lock that layer. Under the layers tab there is the lock word there, and right next to it is a little checkerboard symbol, and I will click that in order to lock the layer so that I can recolor everything as a lighter color for highlights to the little pores. And then I'll go through with an eraser and erase out the blown out areas where the highlights are, or color them a little bit to have a different variation, as not all of the pores will have perfect little highlights with them. If there's anything in these videos that you're not familiar with that I did, please feel free to message me and I can let you know what that little trick is. That's absolutely no problem. I'd like to thank you for watching this video, and as you can see me stealing the font from my other bug illustrations, I do like to make illustrations a lot, so feel free to subscribe if this is your thing. I also do a lot of other nature illustrations and scientific illustrations all the time, as long as it is able to be shown online, and my client is okay with that, then I will be uploading them here. And lastly, for this illustration, I am just cleaning up the edges here to give it a little cleaner look. Sometimes I do like to make it a little bit blurry just for a little bit of realism, but this darkness is also really great. Thank you for watching!